But then the rise of Egyptian nationalism caused further problems to Britain. In 1952, there was a revolution in Egypt. The monarchy was removed, and an army junta took power, which rapidly came to be controlled by Colonel Nasser, who established a dictatorship in Egypt. And this posed new and very difficult problems for Britain, which had had a close relationship with Egypt from imperial times, largely due to the need to control, as Britain saw it, the Suez Canal. Now, in 1875, Disraeli had brought shares in the Suez Canal Company for Britain, so that the company became a joint British and French enterprise. And to ensure that the canal was not threatened by Egyptian nationalists, Gladstone's Liberal government in 1882 instituted a temporary, what it called a temporary occupation of Egypt to ensure stability. Now, that temporary occupation lasted 54 years, until 1936. But even after that, Britain had a strong, though undefined, role in Egypt under the Egyptian monarchy, and Britain retained a base in what was called the Suez Canal Zone, which was actually quite wide. It stretched from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean and westward almost to Cairo, and that was to protect the Suez Canal. And by 1954, there were 80,000 British troops there. So to that extent, Egyptian independence was limited. Now, there was only one occasion on which the two antagonists in the Suez Crisis met, Sir Anthony Eden, the British Prime Minister, and Colonel Nasser, the Egyptian leader, and that was in early 1955. And they had dinner in the British Embassy in Cairo. And Colonel Nasser said he'd always wanted to visit the place from which Egypt had been governed for so many years. And Eden replied, not governed, advised, perhaps. Now, the Egyptians wanted to remove Britain from the canal base, and they instituted guerrilla warfare to get the British out. And the Americans also took the view that Britain should leave, because they argued that the British presence encouraged Egypt and other third world countries to believe that the West was still colonialist, and so that helped the Soviet Union, so the Americans argued. And Anthony Eden, as Foreign Secretary in 1954, signed an agreement withdrawing British troops from the base over a period of 2 years. And he believed that we couldn't maintain our position in the Middle East by the methods of the 19th century, but to maintain our influence, we must try and harness the nationalist movements to our own interests rather than struggle against them. So come to terms with nationalism, withdraw British troops, win goodwill from new nationalist leaders, and then you can preserve British interests not through imperialism, but through goodwill. Moreover, in a nuclear world, it seemed that overseas bases were pointless. Now, if that failed, there was a safeguard in the treaty, because it said that British troops could return in the case of an attack on Egypt by an outside power or by Turkey. Now, Eden negotiated that agreement in 1954 as Foreign Secretary, and his Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was very unhappy about it. He thought it was scuttle. And he was supported by around 40 Conservative MPs who called themselves the Suez Group. And very remarkably, Churchill's private secretary rang one of them up after the backbencher had made a speech in the Commons and told him that the Prime Minister agreed with the backbencher's criticism of his own government. And Churchill said unkindly to Eden that he had not realised that Munich was on the Nile. And that was a reference to the Munich Conference of 1938, which had marked the climax of appeasement.